Welcome. Hi, I'm Conan Smith. I'm the president of the Michigan Environmental Council. It is so great to be here among so many good friends. Dr. Overpeck, Marnice, man, I love you people. Can we give a big shout out to Groundworks, please, for putting this together? And of course, to all of us who are the Michigan Climate Action Network, each and every one of us in the room, thank you for being here. Each and every one of you on the video, thank you for being a part of this. Dr. Overpeck, this is going to be terrible. I'm so sorry, but I got the worst, most cynical, depressing panelists up here. They've got nothing good to say about climate. It's going to be a rough one, folks. Hang in there with us. We regularly have a great conversation with 5 really wonderful activists. Our topic today is federal and state climate action. And the people we're talking with today are doing this work every single day. They are muscling up in legislatures, in courtrooms, in Congress, in our communities to make sure that action is happening. So we're going to talk about 3 big topics today. First, what's happening at the federal level? How can we see progress there? What's happening at the state level? Can we generate some change? And then we're going to talk about action. Like, we have a big election year in front of us, right? So there is some opportunity for us to elevate climate as an issue amongst the elected officials and future elected officials. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. I'm going to start by saying welcome to Dr. Kyle Whyte from the University of Michigan, Margrethe Kearney from the Environmental Law and Policy Center, Hallie Fox with the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, Jamie Scripps with the State of Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. How'd I do that? And Derrell with the Natural Resources Defense Council. So I've got a number of questions teed up for these folks to generate conversation on these 3 big topics. So if you guys fall asleep, I can keep this thing going. However, we would welcome your participation in this dialogue. So if you hear, as we delve into these topics, something that piques your interest, if you have a question or you want to add a comment, please put your hand up and I'll try and recognize you as we go along. We've got about 40 minutes for this dialogue with these wonderful people. I'm going to ask Dr. Whyte to start us off. As we look at the very highest level, climate change is not a technical problem, it is a moral issue. And a lot of your research and your leadership has been to elevate the ethical challenge in front of us alongside that technical challenge. Can you give us a little framing?
Yeah, it's awesome to have a chance to share with you all, and thanks for your work, Conan, moderating. And so some of the information I'm going to share comes from information that I'm pretty active in a role I have on an advisory council in the White House that's focused on environmental justice. And one of the things that I've been really grappling with that speaks to the really good question I was just asked is that all of these activities that are happening from the federal government, they seem so far away from what we need to do here on the ground. And that's a problem that we need to address. And so right now, the Biden administration has all sorts of initiatives, funds, and resources that are out there, hundreds of them, to enable us to do what we need to do to protect our communities and to fight climate change. But how do we make sense of this landscape? And why is it that equity and justice in particular are a key feature? And so I want to just mention a couple of things here to get us started regarding understanding federal policy and climate justice. First, the best entry point into federal policy on climate change right now is something that you can Google or whatever search engine you use. It's Executive Order 14008 on tackling the climate crisis. That executive order, and again, it's 14008, it lays out a set of resources that the administration is seeking to invest. And we've had some wins and we've had some losses. A big loss was that the $500 billion for climate change and Build Back Better didn't happen. But each day we're seeing different wins. So for example, the Biden administration has recently announced that it's ramping up its efforts and bringing in a lot of policy tools to ensure that in the United States, many of the materials for renewable energy can be made here and in ways that are affordable to Americans. So one side of it, before I just briefly get to the second side, which I really want to say a few sentences on, is the resources being made available. So if you start with the areas that you care about most and look up, especially on some of the web pages we have for the White House programs, you'll find the resources that are being made available. But the second part is the process by which those resources hit the ground. And the key initiative to know about is the Justice 40 initiative. As Marnice Jackson stated very, very well, communities that have been left out of every major infrastructure investment in the United States run the risk of being left out of this infrastructure investment that we're going through right now as we attempt to decarbonize and to mitigate climate change. The Justice 40 initiative attempts to, in federal policy language, put a stop to the continuation of that legacy so that communities who have been literally left out of whatever infrastructure investment you want to bring up from back in the day, the railroad, anyone that you can name, would now emerge as leaders and as the primary beneficiaries of the transition to a just climate. And it's called Justice 40 because it states that all major federal investment in key environmental areas, including climate resilience and energy and the workforce development needed to make decarbonization happen, 40% of the overall benefits must go directly to communities that have faced infrastructure disadvantage. So right now, the federal government's given us some guidance, but it all seems so far away. And I think something we can talk about later or in another context is what we can do on the ground to close that gap between the federal resources, the processes like Justice 40, and what we know needs to happen in our regions and in our communities.
I really love that frame and a reminder that the action that is happening at the federal level is big. There are billions of dollars that are flowing into the state of Michigan alone that can help with these efforts. As we think about the context of those expenditures, rest of the panel, can you respond a little bit to the federal impetus for climate action and how you're feeling and experiencing that from your perspectives as advocates, as state actors? Derrell, let me grab you.
Okay. No, absolutely. So from my perspective, what we've been seeing, at least from my, there's a little bit of confusion. I think there's been some good tools that have been out there in terms of the opportunities that we have in terms of connecting those federal dollars to our state level. I think many organizations are still trying to figure out how some of these dollars are trickling down to the state level. And that's actually been some of the time that I've been spending with my NRDC team and making sure that those dollars actually affect some of our major initiatives, things that we need to do on climate change. So for example, where can we take advantage of those dollars to actually affect building decarbonization, but not only make sure those dollars come down, but make sure the folks who actually need them the most actually get those dollars. It's again, like the White House, there's a great website where you can kind of see where those dollars are going, but trying to follow the trail of how those dollars are going to actually get down to regular folks. That's been a little bit of a struggle, but it's been getting better and better as we're learning more and more about the different ways that the dollars can be used. And so these are massive amounts of dollars that are that unprecedented amount of dollars, especially on areas that we have not seen this level of investment before. And so we expected a little bit of a learning process, but it's getting better and better every time. But still, there's a lot to understand. How do we actually make these dollars, make sure they get to the folks who actually need them, and actually center folks who actually, for example, building decarbonization, make sure those dollars are there to help. So but it's been a mixed bag from my perspective. So
Jamie, as those billions of dollars flowed into Michigan, it must have made the state government's eyes kind of bug out. Like, oh, a lot of resources. What do we do here?
Yeah, we're at the state, we're spending a lot of time thinking about and strategizing, like, how do we make sure that we can align the federal funding with like the priorities in the My Healthy Climate Plan, but also go after the competitive dollars that are there in ways that align with our principles. And so climate justice is a huge part of that as well. And so one of the things that we're noticing, and Margrethe, when you spoke about taking time for meaningful engagement, that is something that we're actually noticing at the federal level, that these program details are taking a bit of time to come out, because I think at the federal level, they're really trying to take stakeholder engagement really seriously. And so it's taking a little bit more time. So in some ways, there's some impatience around that, but I think it's important to recognize that this can be a reflection of really meaningful engagement. Hopefully that's what's causing the delay, right? Because that's been a stated priority both at the federal and state levels. So the results, we hope, will be better results, better program design that really does center important principles like climate equity. From the state perspective, we're not waiting. We're not going to wait around for the federal funding to come down. We have our plan. We're going to act. We're going to leverage the federal funding when it comes down in ways that align. But yeah, it is. We're sort of waiting with bated breath for those details, and at the same time, not waiting because we need to act. So yeah, but we do want to mirror that same sort of patient stakeholder engagement at the state level too. So you see, there is a push and pull, and we're trying to relearn some of these things. You know, we do need to take the time for the engagement.
Hallie, the Michigan League of Conservation Voters worked very diligently to secure billions of dollars of investment in water protection. Can you tell us a little bit about that process of those federal dollars coming in from your perspective, then navigating that with the legislature? You all were part of a big coalition that built bipartisan support for pretty significant expenditures in ways that help communities.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, first and foremost, when we saw the big bipartisan infrastructure deal pass on the federal level at the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and I think this is true for a lot of other environmental organizations across the state, the first thing we thought was finally an opportunity to solve some of the problems that we've been facing as a state for generations, and finally an opportunity to set up what the future of this state can look like. I think for multiple reasons, right? Michigan has just seen a systemic disinvestment in our infrastructure. And so, we worked really hard to be able to come together with folks from across the aisle, because I think we realized, this is an issue that affects everybody, regardless of partisan identity, to be able to really think big and bold about how we can set up a future that'll work for people like me and like all of us out here today. So yeah, it was just opportunity to the max. And I think we can continue to try and work towards that.
Margrethe, as you look at the impact of these federal dollars, it's also transforming dialogues about, for example, energy generation. So as we fight against Line 5, we have now dollars behind us that can say there are real and legitimate alternatives.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's, I think, one of the exciting things about the position that I'm in, is that I'm able to fight on behalf of my can and all of you guys on Line 5 to make sure climate is part of the dialogue. But I also get to engage in cases where we're talking about what the solutions are and what the replacements are going to be. And there's, the commission is I think very attuned to that. The Michigan Public Service Commission that we have in place right now has opened up a docket for comments on how we should be encouraging utilities to use that funding. One of the challenges with the commission is that it's a real dense, wonky place to be. And so getting engagement from the people who are impacted on a daily basis and making sure the commission sees the priorities, the struggles, the issues that people in Michigan are facing is really a challenge. And that's one of those places where kind of the crossover from the folks like me who sit in the wonky spaces need a lot of help from other organizers and activists who are engaging on a daily basis with the communities.
Jamie, before we knew there were going to be billions of dollars, the Whitmer administration had already made a very strong commitment to climate change and decided we're going to have a plan. We're going to have a plan that is community driven. We have had the Council on Climate Solutions meet. I think we might have a quorum in this room of those members, actually, which is really great. But there's always a risk, right? When the government does a study or develops a plan, more often than not, we see those plans sit on a shelf. What are the prospects for seeing the recommendations that came out of this plan put into action, especially in light of this amazing amount of investment opportunity we have?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great question. And I brought the plan with me, and it's full of it's full of diverse recommendations. So I'd say like, it kind of depends on the sector you're talking about and the kind of recommendation you're talking about. But on the whole, there's a number of different pathways forward. And first of all, I'll just start by saying it would be so wonderful if we had climate and clean energy champions in the legislature to pass laws to make a lot of this permanent. I mean, it would be great across the board for environmental justice, for certainty for our business community. I mean, the benefits would be huge. So I know that that's something that our friends at LCB are very focused on, and that is just to acknowledge that the Whitmer administration, for all the great leadership we've seen, cannot do it alone. So just that would be wonderful. That's on the wish list. However, just like with the federal funding, we're not going to wait around for that. We need to proceed. So some pathways to consider might be in the regulatory space. So Margrethe brought up at the Michigan Public Service Commission, there's a lot of great progress that we can continue around the power grid, cleaning up, in deployment of renewable energy. And I think we've been doing that for a number of years in Michigan. And I think that we can continue and accelerate that great work. And it's in many ways thanks to the wonderful expertise and advocacy of the people in this space. So aside from the regulatory space, there's executive action. Governor Whitmer can do certain things with her, with her authority as governor, and you will see that is something that will be pursued because this is too important. We can't wait. So I think the final priority is really the partnerships. And I really want to emphasize that because a lot of the partners are here in this room. I think that the expertise in this room, really crucial. It's something that I've been really impressed by with this administration is an acknowledgement and an embracing of the advocacy community. I mean, you can actually see a lot of advocates went into government, and joined the Whitmer administration. And so you have that, from MEC.
So like half of my staff is now in the Whitmer administration. So right. I feel that.
Right. And so, a real benefit there is they bring a sensibility from being advocates, that empathy, and they bring that institutional knowledge. And then I think just a recognition too, that there's a lot that the state government can learn from the people in the advocacy community. There's so much expertise, there's so much passion, there's so much lived experience. We can't do it alone as a state government. We shouldn't try to do it alone. And so we want to do it in partnership with the advocacy community. And I think that's something we've started through the council, but it's something we want to get better at and continue as we move on to implementation.
Dr. Whyte, as you think about the state's plan, how do we connect and where do you see the best opportunities for connecting our justice ethical motivation to the recommendations and actions that are recommended by the state of Michigan?
Yeah, I appreciate the question and appreciate all that my colleagues here have shared. So I think there is a particular strategy that's going to take a lot of will on our part to make the connections that Conan is speaking to. And here's how I understand the landscape. At this point, the United States wealthy donors and others are willing to invest in ending injustice as it relates to the transition that we need to have with regard to how we get our energy. However, that interest and motivation and funding did not change how the United States works. And the United States has never worked in a way in which federal resources, or for that matter, any other resources, ever reached the communities that were historically denied those resources and who need them the most today. And so last year, in the base recommendations we made on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and this is embarrassing for the United States, we were making recommendations for things like the US funds and policies need to just like guarantee that Black, Brown, Indigenous people, low-income people might own some of the new renewable energy or other environmentally friendly infrastructure. And so while it's true that there may have been some advancements in just people realizing they need to do something about injustice, there's a lot of hard work that needs to take place to actually create those pathways so that Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities can exercise their own self-determination, their own sovereignty, their own collectivity to be able to take leadership based on their own ideas and their own aspirations. Now, how do we begin to make that connection? Well, the federal government made a lot of promises at the beginning of the Biden administration, and they provided an architecture for how to do this work. But then they stopped hitting a lot of their deadlines. And so federal agencies, for example, they know that their investments need to secure 40% of the benefits for communities that have experienced disadvantage for many generations. They know that, but they haven't gotten any further guidance on how to do that. But they're trying. And so recently it was announced that about $29 billion in federal spending so far has been subject to Justice 40. But how were they doing that? Well, it was just on a agency by agency basis. Particular people and agencies who cared were making those connections. And so the way things look is kind of like an hourglass, where at the top, you've got the resources and they're supposed to get to the bottom where the needs, the aspirations, the transitions need to occur. And the glass at the top is voluminous and the glass at the bottom is voluminous, but the part in the middle is too thin for the resources to get to where they need to be in time for whatever changes will blow back those gains in another election or in a future election. And so the middle of the hourglass is critical. That needs to be expanded in volume. And how do we expand it in volume? Well, we need to start actually ourselves on the ground, making the case to federal agencies that we know exactly what it means to harness these policies. So for example, in this region, imagine a movement involving communities, involving organizations that serve communities, involving other allies who created a large climate vision that also brought in another key policy called 30 by 30, which is that the Biden administration has committed to conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030. So say we have a plan. It's got Justice 40. It's got 30 by 30. And another thing the Biden administration said is that all solutions are whole of government solutions. It's not on an agency by agency basis. And so we're going to propose a conservation vision, a climate change vision. We're going to use 30 by 30 to justify the conservation aspects, and Justice 40 is going to be used to pay for the infrastructure. And these visions then need to be part of campaigns that directly target agencies who want this information because they're still making discretionary decisions about how they will spend the money. They're not subject to any thoroughgoing guidance. They're literally waiting for people to shake them a bit and say, this is a way to do Justice 40. This is a way to do 30 by 30. I think that's what we need to do.
I love that idea of weaving together these opportunities that have been set in front of us in this intentional way that looks at it as a clean climate future. Margrethe, there's another area in which action is taking place where we sometimes overlook it, and that's in our regulatory systems and our court systems. And when we've talked a little bit about line 5, you lead interventions on rate cases as well with utilities, pushing these actors to take a different perspective. How do you weave together in that regulatory space these ideas of a clean energy, clean climate future, and the opportunities accruing to the impacted communities fastest?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge because I will put together a case and in a utility proceeding where there's a whole lot of clean energy, distributed generation, it's about solar tariffs, and I've got a whole bunch of experts who are talking about what all the customers in Michigan need and want. And I look at these experts and I'm like, you are 5 white guys from different states. And you're not able to tell this entire story. And so one thing that we have seen at the commission that I think is great are community groups who are intervening on their own behalf. And they're not intervening with ELPC or with the Sierra Club or NRDC. They're intervening as separate parties, and really I think should be, because it's important not to lose all of those issues in what can sometimes become a bigger kind of national or even statewide agenda, right? We focus on the urgency, like Marty's was talking about. It's urgent, we got to solve this problem. And then you need somebody who's saying, wait, we need to stop for a second and look around, right? So I think that that's been something that's been incredibly important. Now, what's also going to be important is that we continue to have commissioners in place who want to hear that. And our commissioners are appointed for 6 years. So the ones we have now are pretty good, but at some point their terms will end. And so we need to know that the next ones who are appointed are going to share those same values of wanting to hear from actual customers and communities. And so that's where kind of some of the legislative and the advocacy work on that side really comes in. I need you guys to get good people elected so we can have good commissioners to work with.
I want to do a quick check-in with the audience here. Are there ideas that you want to elevate, questions you want to ask? Kathy.
Yes, thank you. I want to be one of those legislative champions. I'm running for the state house, but I just found out yesterday that 45% of the people in my district are human-caused climate change deniers. So how do I start a conversation with them to help them without arguing?
That is a tough question. So these are complicated issues, right? And we approach the question of difference sometimes in a very combative way, especially in American politics. How do we initiate a dialogue with folks about what is happening in our communities due to climate change in ways that can engage folks? I'll give you one example of a situation that I was in maybe a decade ago. I ran an organization called Metro Matters in Southeast Michigan, and we had a regional energy office. Part of our regional energy office plan was to put together climate change strategies for small cities. One of the cities we worked with, we went through the entire process with them, and it came to city council, and the plan got voted down because they did not want a climate plan for their city. They had a couple members of their council who were adamantly opposed, said climate is not right. We went back and met with them, and we changed the title of that plan to their energy efficiency plan, and it passed very readily. How do we engage people in a different kind of dialogue about this challenge that we collectively face and the impacts that we all bear?
I can start off, so I can put on my other hat. So I also serve as a local elected in Ingham County. And so I have some of those folks in my district, some of those folks who have some questions around, whether, still at this point, have some questions like, is this stuff real? In terms of talking to some of those folks, it's meeting them where they're at. I think a lot of folks are starting to just naturally just see their day-to-day lives change. They're seeing the increased amount of rain, for example. folks who are farmers, they're seeing that their crops aren't yielding or aren't turning over as quickly. These are things that you can start off as a starting point for that conversation, and then start talking about some of those very tangible solutions to how we get at addressing some of the climate change issues. So I try to leave out some of the rhetoric that some of our that really is used to help rally our folks, because we get it, we understand it. But so for some of those folks who are not necessarily there, starting off with very tangible things like understanding where they're coming from, where they're starting from in their world, and then that usually leads into a pretty good conversation about some of those tangible things about saving energy. I mean, that folks I think will not necessarily attribute that or connect that to climate change, but they'll think of that as potentially saving money, conservation, those sorts of things. And those usually have been pretty helpful when I've talked to some of those folks. But this is an ongoing challenge. We're going to have to continue to reach those folks. We're not going to be able to get all the changes that we're going to need to make without bringing some of those folks along. But that's at least a good starting point. So.
Yeah. Am I on? Yes, I am. Okay. Just to kind of add on to what Derrell said, I think it really requires a language translation. And it's one that's not only based on like what those people are experiencing in real time in terms of severe storms, or, maybe their farms are starting to flood out because the severe rains just keep coming and keep affecting them. And so it's connecting it to real on the ground impacts that they're seeing. But I think also when you talk about some climate deniers, it's also a values translation. And so it's not only about, oh, well, your farms are flooding. It's also about, coming together and relating to them on a level where we both want to do what's best for future generations. We both want to do what's best for our families. We both want to do what's best for, our own self-reliance when it comes to energy independence. And so I think it really, again, is that language translation where we kind of get stuck in our own jargon and it doesn't make sense to people, but values and on the ground impacts make sense to everyone.
Derrell, I want to jump back. I did that. Derrell, am I on? There we go. It's a little bit hard with the mask. I apologize for that. I want to jump back to you. At the federal level, when the Biden administration came in, we got a dream team of climate leaders from John Kerry on down, like working hard, brilliant folks who are providing leadership on the environmental side. In fact, your former executive director. And at the state level, the governor not only created the Climate Solutions Council, but she also created the MAC-EJ, the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, which had a heavy hand in shaping the Climate Solutions Council recommendations. These teams are often really incredibly important to informing the dialogue, as Jamie has mentioned, like making sure that there's true engagement. But sometimes they do face barriers to getting into places of power and influence, even if you're a John Kerry, for example, working in maybe an unfriendly Congress. So what do you see these teams doing? What barriers are they facing? How do they start to overcome those? Which aligns with Kathy's question about how do we dialogue more effectively?
Absolutely. And we obviously have a member, Dr. Whyte on both of those. And so I'd love to hear his thoughts as well. But I'll first of all say that the mere fact that these councils exist, that President Biden and Governor Whitmer have put these together is a real testament to the direction that we want to focus, starting to shift how we address and talk about climate change, the MAC-EJ in terms of their oversight and review of the ultimate recommendations that made into the My Healthy Climate plan was invaluable. And so that's a great thing. But I also want to see more of their involvement and more of their influence, especially as we're moving into the implementation stage of these aspects. These are a lot of these ideas, recommendations that are part of the plan are simply just ideas and recommendations. These things have to work for regular people. They need to be crafted in a way that takes into account people's real life experiences, not some theoretical. We had a lot of input into these recommendations, but we need more. We know that the implementation is ultimately going to either be successful or fail. If we know that's not going to be the case if folks are not chimed in and have an adequate opportunity to talk about how these things should work in real life. And so I'm happy that they exist. As going forward, hopefully we see more involvement and more their thoughts in terms of how these processes work, and out front, in terms of the outreach, in terms of the folks who are going to be addressing transportation, for example. We need to make sure the right folks at the table to actually talk intelligently about these different recommendations, and not just a bunch of policy experts, but folks who actually have those lived experiences to actually make these things meaningful and work for everybody. So, but happy to have it, but we need more involvement from these different groups. So.
Those are amazing points. And I wanted to follow up with a historical perspective on why that's important for the work of these two committees and the policies that are flowing from them. So I served previously on two different environmental justice work groups, first under Governor Granholm, then under Governor Snyder. And the first time around, which was an environmental justice work group that was created in a Democratic administration, and we had a whole plan. And a cornerstone of our draft plan was an incredibly rich petition process that would elevate community voice and community knowledge. We had a lot of other aspects of that environmental justice plan too. And when the Snyder administration was coming in, when that administration had been elected but hadn't yet come to power, they said they weren't too excited about that plan. And because our working group had to make a consensus decision on which plan we would say was our final plan, the folks who were representing some of the industries and some of the interests that weren't too excited about environmental or climate justice, it gave them a little bit more power than they'd had previously to push back. And they could have pushed back against any part of that first plan, any part of it. They could push back against the whole thing. But actually, there was only one that really mattered to them. And they said, you have to get rid of the petition process. We'll accept all of the environmental justice recommendations, but get rid of the petition process. That was not a pleasant decision to have to make, but that's why when we reconvened as a different environmental justice working group under Snyder, we fought for the fact that those recommendations would reemphasize that there does need to be that community voice, that community knowledge, and the state needs to invest in the mechanisms to uplift what people know about their own lives, just as you were saying. And so I think we need to continue that legacy of fighting for community voice, community involvement, community leadership. And we need to not forget how long it took to get to this point and to not let anybody else get that off the rails.
Jamie, it's important that government itself not see something like the Mackey J as the only avenue for gathering intelligence about equity concerns. You've talked already a little bit about how intentional the outreach process has been. How is the Climate Solutions Council thinking about that and that equity question when it's doing its engagement, and how is it interfacing with Mackey J to ensure the right questions are being asked and that is an impressive process?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's something that comes up sort of daily, because I think there's a constant need to remind ourselves and leadership that we need expertise and lived experience in these conversations. We also can't keep going back to the same people. That's a big burden to put on, individuals as well. And at the same time, we don't want this to be a siloed conversation about environmental justice. It needs to be threaded through every conversation. These are big challenges. And so we need to build capacity. We need to build relationships. We need to make sure the engagement that we do proceed with is meaningful. And so I know that Corey Connolly, who's the head of the Office of Climate and Energy, he is right now really working on putting together a structure with the Mackey J to make sure that there's a really strong link and relationship between the Office of Climate and Energy within Eagle and the Mackey J, both in terms of when the MACEJ meets with their meetings and when the Office of Climate and Energy and then the Council on Climate Solutions meets. So it's like there's this real effort to not have all these conversations siloed. And that also includes conversations about climate through government, right? Because you could also see climate conversations being siloed, and that is also a challenge. And so I think that it's just something, we want the right expertise in the room, the right lived experience, and we also want to be sensitive to just capacity concerns. And so it's something that we're thinking about every single day, and we're constantly reminding ourselves and everyone around us, this can't be siloed, it has to be threaded through. And I mean, that in and of itself is progress, that's our goal, but it's the fact that we have to remind ourselves every day that just points to the challenge.
Hallie, every one of us has 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals involved in this in our elected officials who go up and represent our communities every day. This is a really important election year. Every statewide office is up for election. Every senator is up for election. Every House member is up for election in Michigan. Every congressional district is up for election. How do we elevate these issues through the campaign process, either putting on your 501c3 nonprofit advocate hat, or your C4, I'm going to get political hat, or your PAC, I'm really going to punch someone in the face hat. Tell us how we engage in this election cycle effectively to make sure that these issues are on the front burner.
Yeah, of course. I'm not that tall, so I would have to punch up. But anyways, no, first I just want to take a step back and reemphasize why this is so important, right? Which is that when politicians run and win on an issue, at least a part of them knows that in order to get reelected, they have to deliver on that issue. And so making sure that climate is central to campaigns in this state at all levels of government is critical to make sure that we have climate action that matters in 2022 and beyond. And so, to make sure that climate change remains a focus and is that central focus, I think, first and foremost, the answer is pretty, self-intuitive, which is that lawmakers and candidates for office won't know what's important to you and won't know what's important to get reelected unless you tell them. And so I challenge each and every one of you to bug the heck out of your current lawmakers who are running for reelection and the candidates that are running in your districts. Call them every week, call them every day and say, climate change is important to me, and I want it to be important to you when you serve me in the legislature. Outside of that, outside of really demanding that climate change remains a focus for your lawmaker and your candidate, I would say getting involved, actually volunteering with an organization, I'm biased, of course, like Michigan LCV or whatever organization of your choosing that gets involved in elections is super important. Because if you're on the doors, if you're talking there with the candidate themselves before going out in the doors and kind of doing your own little pitch to them as to why you think climate change should be a focus for them, those conversations matter and they make a difference. And then, of course, if you really want to dive straight into it, I would say even volunteering for candidates that align with you on your issues to help them get across the finish line. Or even, volunteering with candidates where you think you could find some common ground and you just really want to push them to be a climate ally. All of that is super important. Just communicating and engaging with candidates and your elected officials will make sure that it's a focus.
How about you in the audience? Ideas, questions that you have for these folks? Come right back up the middle aisle.
Hi, I'm Barb Conley. I'm one of those people who is running for the state legislature in the Senate. But what I want to bring out to all of you who are doing this wonderful work and considering a climate plan, which is wonderful. But what I mean, people up here are waiting for these clean jobs that are not coming. Okay, so they're not going to believe in it. So is there a possibility to allow people to propose climate, make a company, propose we're going to, decarbonize buildings, or we're going to put more renewable energy in the Upper Peninsula, for example? let's get the money out there sooner rather than later. That doesn't have to be all of it, but some of it, just so people can believe that this infrastructure plan has actually got some teeth. Thanks.
Yeah, here. I will say, if any of you are interested in creating jobs in the clean energy economy or working in that space, Pat is here for Michigan Saves in the back. They have a contractor network that is hundreds of companies strong. Happy to like engage with folks who want to get in that space and become real actors, like getting their hands dirty in this space. Folks, we are just about at the time limit here. I want to give each of you an opportunity to say a few last words. Dr. Whyte?
Great. So I just wanted to reiterate, if you're looking for some orientation, Executive Order 14008, Justice 40 Initiative, 30 by 30 Initiative, and then really reading very carefully into the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council's recommendations on Justice 40 to see what it means for these policies to be implemented in ways whereby communities can express their empowerment and their aspirations and their self-determination.
And I just want to reiterate to everyone to remember how key it is that climate is part of the Line 5 case. It's huge. This is the first time that any administrative agency has looked at climate and granting an application under Act 16 or any other permit. And it's a big deal. No matter what happens at the end of the day, this is a big deal. And this case is not a journey at all. This case is a ruck, but we're going to keep going. And I want you to remember that we've made real progress on it.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to say that, the work that we have to do before us is big. It's going to be hard, but it's going to take all of us to reach a solution that works for all of us. And so again, I just challenge each and every one of us that are here today and joining us on Zoom to get involved in your communities, get involved in campaigns, and push for a future that works for all of us together. Make your voice heard, because that's why we're here. So that's it.
I would just say, please continue to push on your leaders in state government. And please continue to engage and partner with all the folks, at state government, federal government, but also in business too. I think that we have a real ecosystem of folks who really care about this issue in Michigan. And I think the opportunities for partnership across the board are tremendous. And we're not going to be able to do it alone. So let's do it together. Thanks.
And I'll just close by saying again, so we have this My Healthy Climate Plan, which again, many months of work, many of you had an involvement in. Now we're moving into the implementation stage. As those opportunities come up, please be involved. Again, we need all voices to be part of that process. Again, those recommendations aren't going to become reality without all of us really working to shape what that actually means in real life for folks. So.
Let me ask you all to take the easiest action today and put your hands together for this great panel. Thank you all. Very insightful, inspiring, and we'll be back in a year to report on more action.